somebody over there. Whose laptop is that?
It's mine.
Okay, that's perfect. So I can see it. And then this? No. That's this. Mouse. So then I have a mouse, I have a pointer, and I have a laptop. Ah, you have one. I can use yours. It's fine. Well, you should not insert an unknown USB into your machine. This is just the keyboard. It's not a disk. Pardon? Can I what? Oh. Oh, I have to turn it on, huh? Huh.
Well, I hope Eduram is better than
Pardon?
guest. I hope Eduram is better than guest.
Seems to work.
Guest is completely hobbled.
Is completely.
Hobbled.
Ah.
I think they have an access control policy called no.
Well, it seems to work. Oh, wrong button push. Here's the note well.
Thank you very much. Come on.
For boys, thank you is cup and cup.
Cup and cup.
Girls leave off the final P. So we throw the P on the end.
Throwing the stuff on the ground sometimes. Come on, Apple. What are you doing to me? Personal hotspot. It's called on.
Whose sim you got?
Detail. Local sim.
Go for it.
I'm trying.
I have local sim with infinite data.
That's the one I've got.
I have True though. I buy True because they're a member of the exchange.
Oh, okay. Well, it was whatever was at the airport, right? And, you know,
I normally get at the airport, but every time I plan to get at the airport, I don't want to keep the driver waiting. So I do that, and I get it when I get into town. It's like, oh,
evidently the driver was waiting
of course.
with the symbol of
I was there when you discovered it.
I was looking for my name.
You should know your name. You didn't have to look for
I
it.
need to know my name. sort of musing about Cloudflare. When I go to my website hosted on Cloudflare, 2 IP addresses are entirely different to someone else who goes to my website hosted on Cloudflare. It's kind of, what's the address got to do with things anymore?
It's magic.
It's just magic. I wish what would be magic
Is if the internet worked. You're complaining. First you're telling me how wonderful all this all is, and then you're banging your head against it.
Banging my head against it. Plan B.
What's plan B?
My son gave me a Google Fi 7.
Ah,
Plan B. Let's see if this one works any better.
I can put up a thingy with true. If you want.
It's not that I'm lacking that, it's more that why won't my Mac associate with it?
I only have 2 bars on true, but you might give it a try.
Oh, that's okay, I've got 4 bars on. Well, now I'm on DTAC with 5, so I presume I've VPN somewhere parts distant. Turn Wi-Fi off, just stop it. Think about your sins. Repent. Come back a new person.
All the 2,000 stores in MBK, I splurged $100 to get a new cover for my phone because the old one was so turkey.
software now?
It's probably not the same phone.
Evidently not, because this one.
This is an old 6.
So is this.
But it's a different carrier. So the only power is way down there, huh? Oh, there.
I don't know where to look. Anyone? Randy can have it.
What kind of...
No, you have it. You have it. Okay.
Just a second. Hold on, don't. Oh, yes, you can plug him in. No, don't plug him in. Just a second. Just a second.
I have a really, really cute one.
I gave it to you.
Thank you, Randy.
That's just what I was fishing for. No, put it on me because I've got the Euro.
No, I haven't got a Euro. Mine's all.
But you don't need it.
No, I don't either. No, we're good. But
He plugs into that.
is there a power there? Okay, so you need to plug me into there, and good things will happen. Oh, I like that yellow thing.
Is it nice?
Oh,
It's not yellow, it's mango.
there's a meeting room from hell run by the OECD where they had 3 power outlets and about 30 people. And that little yellow mango saved lives.
Well, for a small fee,
That one. It's the same.
no, it's a 3-way fork.
Oh, this one's kind of.
2 ท่านนะครับทั้ง2 ท่านนี้เองก็ถือว่าเป็นกูรูเป็นคนที่ทำงานอยู่ในวงการอินเทอร์เน็ตมานานนะครับพิธีกรท่านแรกก็คือของคุณแลนดี้บุชนะครับคุณแลนดี้บุชนี่เองก็เรียกว่าเป็นผู้รู้เป็นกูรูในอินเทอร์เน็ตนะครับมีผลงานต่างๆมากมายนะครับเป็นผู้ก่อตั้งตัว NSRC Network Startup Resource Center ไม่ทราบท่านรู้จักหรือเปล่านะครับหรือในวงการตัว IETF นะครับไม่ทราบท่านรู้จักตัว IETF ไหมครับอินเทอร์เน็ตเราเกิดมาก็จาก IETF ใช่ไหมครับคุณแลนดี้บุชเองก็มีส่วนร่วมในการเขียน IFC อยู่หลายๆอันนะครับหรืออันล่าถ้าในวงการเน็ตเวิร์กก็จะรู้จักเรื่องของตัว BGP ใช่ไหมครับแต่ตอนนี้เองก็มีอย่างBGP อันล่าสุดเรื่องของตัว BGP Sec Operation Consideration นะครับตัว IFC 8207อันนี้ก็คือเขียนโดยคุณแลนดี้บุชเองนะครับท่านก็มีพอร์ตลงมาวันนี้เองคุณแลนดี้บุชเองก็จะมาพูดเกี่ยวกับเรื่องของNET นะครับเรื่องของ NET ว่าเราก็คงได้ยินมานานใช่ไหมครับว่า NET มันไม่ดีอย่างนู้นอย่างนี้อะไรสารพัดอย่างแต่ณวันนี้มองออกมาเราก็ยังใช้ NET กันอยู่นะครับก็น่าสนใจนะว่าเกิดอะไรขึ้นทำไมเรายังใช้ NET กันอยู่นะครับก็ทั้งนั้นก็ so please welcome Mr. Lenny Bush he will talk about NET evil but inevitable
Hello. First I get to take a picture of you. My wife wonders what I'm doing. Thank you. Okay. So, I presume since you are operators, you know what NATs are. They're network address translators. Oops, a little too fast. There's the outside, which has public address space, the wide open internet, the real internet. There's inside, hidden or private address space, and we think it's protected private internet. Okay? So the NAT translates between the outside and the inside. It's too fast. But the problem is the NAT in its translation has to keep dynamic state. In other words, it has to keep the mapping between the inside and the outside. So each NAT maintains a table which maps the addresses from one realm, the inside or the outside, to the other. Mappings are created when the NAT guesses they're needed. Mappings are freed when the NAT thinks they are no longer needed, but they're also freed when the NAT runs out of table space. So I've been losing my SSH sessions here on EduRoam in about 2 minutes when the NAT forgets me. This is the wonderful world of NATs. Okay. So, and what's worse is some packets have IP addresses in their payload, like DNS, right? So we get, to solve that problem, we get application layer gateways that enhance the NAT by understanding the application. So for each application that embeds addresses, there's an application, custom application gateway like DNS. Okay? And they can create and delete translation entries, and there's a special code required, FTP, DNS, SIP, real audio, all sorts of things need application layer gateways. But what about the end-to-end principle that my packets flow from one end of the internet to the other? NATs break that. Okay? The internet original design was based on smart edge, stupid core. Okay? The voice network has stupid edge, those silly little, well, your phone, nowadays it's smart edge, right? These are pretty smart, but you know, the phones I grew up with were a microphone, a coil, and a bell, right? And the core of the network were these multi-million-dollar switches, Ericsson, AT&T 5ESS, etc. The internet has smart edge, okay, computers, etc., and a stupid core, which just forwards packets to the destination address in the packet. Okay, that's all it's supposed to do. Adding a new service to the internet is, if I just want to test a new protocol, Nan can install the software, I install the software, it works over the end-to-end internet because the packets are not touched in the middle. Nobody's messing with them. Nobody needs to understand the protocol. It's just packets. Okay? What if I wanted to add a service to the voice network? Okay? The telcos took decades to put rotary dialing in, right? Remember the dials? It took them decades to do that. You used to pick up the phone and tell the operator who you wanted to talk to, right? Then they wanted to go to touch tone. More decades. Okay? Just changing an edge protocol. Email was a service added to the ARPANET in a day. HTTP was added to the internet as an experiment over a week. To do it over the telco network would have taken a decade or more. With NATs, tomorrow's killer applications may take a ridiculously long time to deploy, or they have to be specially designed to get through NATs. Okay? And even today's applications are hard to deploy if they require application layer gateways. So the young woman, 16-year-old in her house right now developing the wonderful new app for your phone, okay, has to think about that. And either has to design it, or she has to get the AT&T lawyers to approve her ALG. Well, if her application competes with the people running the core translators in the network, are they going to change those translators to adapt to the wonderful new application? Not a chance. Not a chance. So what is the reaction of the protocol designers? Classically, we had the Internet Protocol Hourglass, which is IP at the waist. And IP could run over Ethernet, PPP, satellite, etc., etc. And then everything ran on top of IP, so we called this the hourglass because the narrow waist was IP. The reaction is that HTTP, because NATs are letting HTTP through, the HTTP protocol is now becoming the waist of the hourglass because it can get through NATs. And this is not a simple protocol. And it's going through revisions. And then there's HTTPS, the secure versions, etc. Okay? This is not a simple change. It's an expensive and complex change. merely to avoid gnats. Or not to avoid them, but to get through them in a guaranteed fashion. Okay? So gnats break global addressability, they break IP fragmentation, they break host to address bindings, hard to deploy new applications, they degrade reliability, scalability, they make management, network management difficult. Okay? And that's just a gnat. What if there's a gnat in my provider and there's that my inside is secure? There are many problems with that belief. Part of it comes from originally gnats came with firewalls. But firewalls aren't magic either. Okay? So, does changing my name badge stop somebody from hitting me? Do gnats slow email viruses and worms? Right? Do you get bad spam with click-it links that will poison you? Can I get a DDoS attack? All those things gnats don't do anything about. Okay? The security is a story. It's a comfortable lie, but it's a lie. The father of firewall, Steve Bellovin, sent me this picture. This is the effect of a firewall or a gnat. Yeah? Well, see the tracks? All the bad stuff just drives around it. Right? All the bad stuff is designed to deal and anticipate with gnats and to anticipate firewalls. Right? Those things are what we call a hard, crunchy outside, like candy that's hard on the outside and soft and gooey on the inside. So once it can get around or through that soft, crunchy, that hard exterior, it gets to all the delicate bits instantly. One story I like to tell, I don't know if you know of Stuxnet. The US and Israel wanted to damage Iran's nuclear weapons development. They put a USB drive and just laid them out where the Iranian engineers would find them. The Iranian nuclear site was heavily protected. Okay? Somebody picked up the USB drive, stuck it in their laptop, walked into the engineering facility. They destabilized 1,000 centrifuges, and they set Iran's nuclear program back years. Okay? So, all the security products, right? So, it isn't magic. The long-term problem is, as your network grows, the cost of maintaining a complex NATed infrastructure grows worse than linearly. But NATs themselves are really one of a family of devices we call middle boxes, because they're in the middle of the network and they're not transparent. Okay? Some of them are load balancers, surveillance, deep packet inspection, breakers of TLS, of the transport layer security that HTTPS provides, right? Palo Alto Networks makes something that when your HTTPS connection comes in, it fakes the certificate, breaks it, looks at the traffic, and fakes it again to your laptop. Okay? TLS 1.3, which is in design today, actually solves that problem, but the hardware manufacturers who sell these devices to enterprises and to repressive governments are trying to get it modified so it doesn't give solid protection. But the last ones where I'm going to focus now is IPv6, IPv4 translation. Okay? And the problem is IPv6 is on the wire incompatible. The designers of IPv6 did not design it to play with IPv4. They said, what we're designing is so wonderful that everybody is going to jump. That was 25 years ago. Okay? So do we really need those NATs? Well, we're out of IPv4 space. We do need more, but there is none. Get over it. Jeff's here from APNIC. You got any v4 addresses with you, Jeff?
On me, no.
If I want to run an IPv6 internal network in my business, in an enterprise, there's something that does translation between v4 and v6 called NAT 6-4, DNS 6-4, so I can reach the external internet. Okay? But we need to run IPv4 and IPv6 for a very long time. So NAT 6.4 is NAT with an IPv6 inside and IPv4 and maybe IPv6 outside. So NAT v6 inside, dual stack outside. And it translates through a horrible hack that I won't go through today. You're welcome. Okay, it allows my enterprise, my business, to be v6 only. I don't have to go get more address space. But I still have to live in the IPv4 world. And people want to say, can't we just dump IPv4 and let everybody use IPv6? Our job is not a religious war, right? Our job is to let the customer run their business. They don't care about what flavor packets it is. Don't make them go through major unnecessary changes because you think IPv6 is easier or better. It's not a very good business that argues with its customer. So why has the transition to v6 been so slow? Okay. Was it the vendors who were very slow to implement v6 in routers? Was it lazy operators, which the IPv6 people complained and told us how horrible we were as operators because we didn't convert instantly to IPv6, even if the hardware didn't support it? Okay. Was it the lack of there being content in IPv6? Who wants to install it when there's nothing out there? Is it that applications don't support IPv6? Is it the customer premises equipment, the stuff at the edge of your customer? Is it the end user host stack in Microsoft Windows 95, 97, 99, whatever the heck, Microsoft or Apple or whatever? Okay. Is it because there are only 430 different transition mechanisms? The IETF has come up with mechanism after mechanism after mechanism for the transition, right? And still, the internet is less than 10% IPv6. The problem is the transition depended on all of them. It depended upon the vendors. It depended upon the applications. It depended upon your laptop's protocol stack, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They all have to be there. Here we are 25 years later. They're barely usable today. Okay? But But there's a much larger problem. In America and I think in Europe, we have an expression is when we want to pretend something isn't there, we say there's an elephant in the room, and we pretend we don't see the elephant. Right? Well, the elephant in the room is that it's incompatible with IPv4. It was a tragic mistake in the design. And it had a new business model, and it didn't have the same features as IPv4. It still doesn't have all the features of IPv4. Who here has an Android phone? Hello? Who has Android phones here? Everybody's an iPhone user? Cool. Android phones don't do DHCP-v6 because Lorenzo Coliti at Google doesn't believe in DHCP. Right? DHCP-v6 itself doesn't have router announcement. Right? You can't learn with DHCP-v6 where the router is. You have to use v6 religion and get a route advertisement when you issue a router solicitation. So there's not even feature parity. Today, 25 years later, and this is those little stupid DHCP things are a war in the ITF. So is this a transition? No. It's a disaster. It's a disaster. It was not a transition, it was a leap. And 25 years later, not very many people have taken the leap. It's easier for that enterprise to just run NAT 4.4. IPv4 on the outside, network 10 on the inside. Anybody here, when I connected to Eduroam, I got a network 10 address. This place is running NAT 4.4. Okay? So we're trapped. We're caught. That's my cat, by the way. We're caught in a transition that is difficult and expensive and poorly designed. And it's moving very slowly. It might be accelerating. It's hard to measure. How did we do this? Arrogance in the ITF. Oh, we can design this and everybody will jump. Well, they didn't jump. Okay? And so we're paying for it today. So it's incompatible. There was no transition plan. It was supposed to be dual stack. Okay? Where all our backbones have v4 and v6. Your Office was supposed to be dual stack v4 and v6. There's a little problem with that. For some device to be dual stack, it has to be have a v4 address and a v6 address. But that means that it requires as many v4 addresses as v6 addresses. And since v6 was supposed to handle the problem that we're out of v4 addresses, that's just illogical. That's not going to happen. Right? So dual stack was an unrealistic transition mechanism. We can do it on our backbone. Right? But you were just, how many devices did you say Cisco's saying on the internet? 34 billion or some number? 30 billion devices on the internet, right? So we're kind of, unless you can manufacture more integers, we're in trouble. Okay? So it's dual stack as the total transition isn't going to happen because 2 to the 32 is much less than 2 to the 128th. And how somebody at the ITF didn't understand that basic mathematics is beyond me. Okay? But it's too late. We don't have an alternative to IPv6. We're out of IPv4 space. So guess what we're going to do? To be able to reach IPv6 sites and email and IPv4 cats, we have to get to the cats. For a very long time, we're going to have to do a horrible hack. The internet used to be this nice, simple place, as I said, where packets flowed through a transparent core. We can destroy the environment, and we're doing it with carrier-grade NATs. Okay, this is when your carrier translates from the 128-bit internal to 32-bit external with a massive NAT inside the carrier. Okay? And the problem with carrier-grade NATs is we're the salmon, and we can't swim upstream. We're dying. Law enforcement's having problems trying to find out who had this IP address at this exact instant because they downloaded something illegal. Okay? And when the ISPs say service continuity, they're installing a big giant CGN to get service continuity. What that means is they're not transitioning to IPv6. That's what it means. Okay? And I and a couple other researchers, actually about 8 other researchers, did a measurement to show how pervasive carrier-grade NATs are. There are more people behind carrier-grade NATs than there are deploying IPv6. The mobile networks, especially in Asia and Eastern Europe, are dominated by carrier-grade NATs. The fixed line networks are becoming dominated by carrier-grade NATs. It's bad. Okay? It's IPv4 life support. Right? It is not a transition to v6. But the incompatibility leaves no choice. You can either translate or you can encapsulate. Okay? You can put the IPv6 packets inside IPv4 packets, or put IPv4 packets inside IPv6 packets. So they're not going to move that big dam, and they're not going to remove their multi-million-dollar NATs. It doesn't make economic sense for them to do so. So what should we do? Let's work on mechanisms that are actually progress towards v6. If we're going to put funny devices in the network, let's prefer mechanisms which are stateless. In other words, they don't have the tables that drop me off. Jeff doesn't like where I'm going. I believe in Matt E. Sorry. Stateless, and use IPv6 mechanisms, not v4 mechanisms. And keep as much state at the edge as you can and not in the core. And here's something from inside the ITF crew. You've got, do you tunnel IPv4 inside IPv6, or do you tunnel IPv6 inside IPv4? Do you keep state, or do you stay stateless? These are the stateless mechanisms that use IPv6 transport. These are the ones that don't. Well, actually, they're stateful, but they use IPv6 transport. This is one I particularly like, DS Lite. The carrier gets to put massive NAT in the core, and they have to replace all the customer premises equipment. Double loss. Right? So, use mechanisms which preserve end-to-end and the other basic principles as much as possible. So, you think I hate IPv6, right? So I'm well known as an IPv6 hater. IIJ, for whom I work, is an international backbone. We deployed IPv6 in 1997, 20 years ago. We're the first commercial deployment of IPv6. Right? We still do it today. Our financial people remain skeptical. But I'm the one who brought NatPT back into the IETF. I don't know if it was a good idea. And I'm still arguing with the IPv6 religious fanatics today to clean up the last problems to make it easier to deploy. We made some bad choices. We have to remove those bad choices. We have to live with and work around those we can't fix. And NATs are one with which we will have to live. And I think, probably for decades, we've broken the internet. It's not going to get better. What we have to do is minimize the damage as much as we can. And that is it. Yes, Jeff, I did it in a half an hour. 74 slides. Questions? You're no fun. Uh-oh.
Buttons here, Randy. I can press some buttons here, Randy. I just heard today at Antec all about name-based networking. I know, I have the same reaction of kind of, instead of manipulating binary IP addresses, we manipulate names. It's never going to work. But NATs allow us to do something very, very different. And I'm kind of impressed about this. And I think there's a future there. Because this idea that we need a unique naming system, the DNS, and a unique addressing system is one too many. We don't need both of them. Either, like the telephone system, you make the numbers unique and you don't care about the names, or you make the names unique and you don't necessarily have to care about the addresses. So how do you react to this? The only function of addresses is to allow the network to distinguish one flow from another. And therefore, when I'm not talking, I don't need an address. And that's what NATs do. Surely, with all of this NAT hating in the IETF, what they forgot was actually a really interesting principle. That you can do networking that names the endpoints and just uses addresses to define the lanes on the road, not the endpoints of the roads. So aren't NATs actually a step in the right direction?
I don't buy it. I just got kicked off Network 10. There's been lots of studies about the simultaneous use of the translation mechanisms and the IP space. When I have big NAT, say I have 500,000 users behind that carrier grade NAT, how many IPv4 addresses do I need out front? What's the rate that the carrier grade NATs use something called A plus P. They give you 10 ports. Okay, and since there are 1K ports, therefore they can multiplex 100 users. Or they can do 1,000 to 1 or whatever it is. Okay, so there have been studies about how many flows you have and how many users I can stack on an address, how many lanes you can have on Jeff's highways. And the problem is it's not as simple as you think, because your browser starts about 12 of them at once to try to give you a fast page, right? And so on and so forth. So the studies, the measurement studies have shown that it actually, the ratio is not that great, and it's declining. So today you can do a fair size carrier grade NAT fairly successfully if you have, you know, a /16 and 1 million users. That is not going to last.
HTTP2, instead of setting up separate sessions, which is what old browsers did, you know, we learned the lesson, Randy. Not we, I don't write a browser, but the browser guys were listening. And HTTP2 multiplexes inside the one flow. So it's all you to me, but now we're multiplexing.
How many flows are there on the simplest web page?
Oh, about 20 or 30.
That's the problem.
But
and then there are even researchers that put up invisible dots to add one.
You're right, we're just having fun. But what I'm saying is, in some ways there has been a bit of pushing and shoving between the network and the app. And the extravagant use of ports by the app is getting some network pushback. And if you want your app to work, these days you do have to be a little bit careful about how many simultaneous sessions you open, because it won't work in every case. So it's not as if everyone's running blind. There is a certain amount of feedback going on.
Yep.
We're having a final conversation here, but others might want to join.
Here's a free microphone. Oh, wait, you can push your buttons.
Randy. Oh, okay.
I'm just wondering, because I teach what they call advanced networking, things like that. And there are things like RINA, the RINA, the recursive, blah, blah,
That's
blah.
John Day.
Yeah. And what do you think about that? Or that's
a nice idea, but this is an operators meeting. What's realistically deployable today? It's like Jeff's talking about name-based networking. That's a fantasy that's been going on for 30 years. Right? And so John Day's ideas, John Day's brilliant, okay? I've known him for a while. He really is. But that's not happening. Right? What's happening is what we as operators are facing on a daily basis. And that is the IPv6 transition mess. And what the heck do we do? We're out of address spaces. What are we as operators doing about it? Okay, how many people here are network operators of a net that uses NATs? Come on, let's tell the truth. Nobody's using NATs, right? At home you all have global v4 addresses, right?
Randy, and yes?
Yeah.
And for the fact is IPv4 and IPv6 are actually the separate protocol. It's not the migration for v6 to v4 or transition. It just add a new protocol on the networking stack, right? So about the idea of for the use for the CGN for the IPv4 net only, but for the IPv6 just use the native without translation in the middle. I think the most of the Thai operator use this and for the deploy IPv6 in the network. I noticed at my home I have like the CPE, and I got the private IPv4 and the real IPv6, and the fact is most of the traffic on the internet maybe more than 70% came from the Google, Facebook that support the IPv6. So I can play the IPv6 with those content without any problem.
That measurement is interesting. And I'm a network operator, so Google may have X amount of Facebook may have Y amount, et cetera, but how much of the internet traffic is V6? And since I'm a network operator, I measure in the middle of the internet. And for instance, the Seattle Internet Exchange, which is the 20th by volume, the 20th largest in the world, passed 10% IPv6 in July. Finally made it to 10% in July of 2017. Okay? And to me, that's a realistic measurement. It would be interesting to look at BK-NIC's IPv4 versus IPv6 traffic.
This is because of the pattern of the traffic on the overall net is going to change. Maybe it's a topic that Jeff is going to talk
It's
later.
the overall traffic. The whole world is not Facebook.
But for the user,
I don't even have a Facebook account.
But for the customer point of view, maybe internet mean the Facebook or the Google, and that is for the customer.
Turn on your mic, Jeff. There
You
go.
could well be right. And if we imagine a world where 90% of the service operators' revenue come from delivering only Google, Facebook and Netflix, they won't care about the other 10%. They won't care about connecting you to anything other than your local content distribution center. They don't care what network protocol you use, because you're not going to collide with anyone in Australia, Vietnam, England, anywhere else in the world. So what the content providers are doing today, as we speak, is dismantling the internet and producing a whole bunch of very localized content cones. No one has built from the carrier world a submarine cable for the last 6 years. Only Google, Microsoft and Amazon are investing in long distance. By the time you've figured out whether you're running V4 or V6 in these networks, Google and Amazon and Facebook don't care. Because if you're sitting in their cone, you might as well run Apple Talk. You're not speaking to anyone else. The internet's disappeared. So it's kind of, you're in a really perilous situation here, that at some point all of this industry uncertainty is going to be taken away from you. And you will simply be delivering that last mile between the content distribution center here in Bangkok, because you're big enough, and the customers in Thailand. And that's your only job. Nothing else.
And the internet will have become television.
Exactly.
Literally.
We're not joking, and this will happen inside 5 years unless you do something.
Can you do something? Produce local content, right? Host your local content. Put it at the exchange. Go participate in the global internet. V4 and V6. Right? He asks, what can we actually do?
It's a really, really hard question. You know, in some ways, I can understand all the operators chasing money. But what you do is you chase the easiest money and you ignore the hard money. The easiest money is content data center to user. It's quick, it's easy, it's making you money. But when someone complains that they can't get to someone in Poland, do you spend time at it? Do you worry about it? Do you worry about the consistency of routing? You probably don't, because that one customer isn't worth much money to you, and so you don't do anything about it. And it's those kinds of little things that when everyone behaves like this, you tend to lose the internet. 20 years ago, when we were first building this, our job was to take users and bring them to content wherever that content might have been. Facebook only ran 3 data centers, 2 on the west coast, 1 on the east coast of America. If you wanted to use Facebook,
We weren't there 20 years ago.
Oh, 10, whatever. You're right, 10. They quickly multiplied though. And all of a sudden, they start building out to you. But they're not using your infrastructure, and that's the key thing. They're building their own private infrastructure. They're coming out to you at their cost. This industry hasn't got on well with content. The ISPs thought content should pay them money. The content folks said, not only are we not going to pay you money, we're going to build around you. And that's what's happened. So by refusing to come to an arrangement where you both survived, the larger is now killing the smaller. And when you say, what have you got to do about this? I really think, and it might even be too late, you've got to come to terms with the data center folk, you've got to come to terms with Google and Amazon and stop treating them like customers. And it might be too late. I really don't know if they're even interested in a conversation anymore. I'm sorry, the truth is hard here.
Okay. ก็เนี่ย thank you Landy Bush ขอเชิญ Landy Bush please Randy we come on the stage yeah give some
Don't you want this?
ขอเชิญอาจารย์ยันยง ช่วงนี้ก็ทานอาหารนะครับเจอร้านอาหารอยู่ข้างหน้านะครับแล้วเข้ามาทานข้างในได้นะครับ It's dinner time. You can take the dinner box outside and eat on the table.
I'm looking at which is your provider? Who?
DTAC.
Do you know their AS?
Wow.
DTAC. Do you know what?
Yeah, DTAC Thailand.
I've got a list of all the Thai providers.
All right.
And the big ones are the DV6, AS, AP Advanced Wireless
No,
Network.
no, not that one. This is they do V6, I believe. Because this is I got
Yeah,
V6.
I can see that. I'm just looking at the ones who do V6. I've got Jastel. No one.
เดี๋ยวถ้าดึกกว่านี้เดี๋ยวเราจะติดมากกว่านี้หรือว่าตรงนี้จะดีแล้วก็ไม่รู้นะครับเราถ่ายติดก่อนเราจะได้กลับบ้านยิ่งดึกยิ่งไม่ติดนะคะอันนี้ไม่ต้องก็เดี๋ยวถัดไปก็ขอแนะนำวิทยากรท่านถัดไปนะครับคุณเจฟฮูสตันนะครับก็ปัจจุบันท่านก็เป็นตำแหน่งเป็น Chief Scientist ที่ ThaiNOG นะครับในประวัติที่ผ่านมาก็เป็นกูรูอีกท่านหนึ่งในวงการอินเทอร์เน็ตนะครับต้องเรียกว่าเป็นบิดาของอินเทอร์เน็ตในประเทศออสเตรเลียนะครับ The Father of Internet in Australia ก็ได้เป็นผู้นำอินเทอร์เน็ตเข้าไปในออสเตรเลียแล้วก็สร้างเครือข่ายขึ้นมาในอดีตนะครับในวงการ ASP เองก็มีแต่งหนังสือเกี่ยวข้องอยู่หลายๆเล่มนะครับอย่างเช่นว่าเรื่องของตัว ASP Survival Guide Internet Performance Survival Guide ครับเป็นหนังสือที่แต่งมานานแล้วนะครับก็มีผลงานนั้นนี้อยู่มากมายนะครับก็วันนี้ท่านก็จะมาพูดเกี่ยวกับเรื่องของ interconnection กับ peering นะเรียกว่าโครงสร้างของอินเทอร์เน็ตคงจะเปลี่ยนไปเดี๋ยวท่านคงบรรยายให้ฟังว่าปัจจุบันนี้เปลี่ยนไปยังไงแล้วก็เมื่อกี้อาจจะดิสคัสกันอยู่บ้างนิดหน่อยก็คงมีในตอนนี้นะครับโอเค Jeff please
Right, thank you. I'll just get this set up. I have this other talk, by the way, on BBR, all about TCP. Interested? Okay, I tried. It's a good talk. Let's do this one. It'll happen. So, this is a talk about interconnection and peering, and what I want to do was sort of compare what we were saying 20 years ago with what we're saying now. It's kind of strange that you should ask me to talk about this, because 20 years ago I worked for Telstra in Australia. Telstra then and now is one of the larger telecommunications companies in Australia. It's the largest there. And at the time it was the dominant internet service provider. And I was their internet service architect. And I didn't peer in Australia with anyone. Not one. So you're asking me to talk about interconnection and peering when realistically I didn't do it. And not just didn't want to do it, I did not do it in Australia. So I'll talk about what we were talking about 20 years ago, and you can see a little bit of the justification as to why I didn't do it. And we'll see if your situation differs. So, let's rock back in time. I actually dug this out. This is 20 years ago, 1998. But I think it's the same. And I think it's exactly the same here, probably as in Australia or anywhere else. Internet service providers aren't government-run telephone monopolies. So in Thailand you had one. In Australia we had one. America had one at some point, AT&T. And they came in one size, a country size, because that was the way we did it. Across the 1980s, largely prompted by the Americans, the telephone companies around the world were forced to privatize. In some cases, this was forced upon them by people like the International Monetary Fund. And so a country of 300,000 people, Fiji, was forced to have 2 telephone companies, and then 3, because then they got IMF funding. They all knew each other. They all used to work for one company. It's a kind of a strange joke, but what was happening was that the telephone system was being privatized. Instead of being a government business, it was becoming a business with private capital. Now, at that time came the internet. And all of a sudden, the internet was funded by private capital, not public capital. It was funded by business people, researchers and academics. Randy ran one up in Oregon. It was called RainNet. See, I remember Randy. I ran one in Australia. It was called the Australian Academic and Research Network. You had one here in Thailand called... I've forgotten what the Academic and Research Network was called. It's still running, right? There you go. You see, everyone did it. And it wasn't the government running one. Everyone, you know, ran it. Lots of businesses, large and small. So why were they doing it? Well, some folk thought, well, we can do stuff better than others, what we call a niche market opportunity. Or they were the old telephone company. This was their business, so they just kept on doing it. Normally, folk are there to make money. And so they either saw revenue opportunity or some kind of capital gain. A lot of folk built ISPs to sell. So they're in the business and then they sold it. And others, like the telephone companies, often got into this business because if they didn't, they had a problem. So it was to sort of cover risk. So lots of providers, lots of motives. But how do they interconnect? Because oddly enough in the internet, there's only two ways that two providers can interconnect. You're an ISP, I'm an ISP. We're going to put a wire between us. Do you pay me or do I pay you? Not easy to figure out. Now, if I'm big and you're not, and you believe me, I become your transit provider and you pay me. If you're big and I'm little, and we agree on this, I pay you. But it's not clear often. And if we can't agree on who's bigger than whom, sometimes we'll do peering, like what happens at your exchange points where we both interconnect and swap traffic, but we don't pay each other. And those are the only models we use on the internet, just those two. The telephone system didn't use two models. The telephone system was entirely different. So why? So it might be easier if we follow the money. So I'm in Australia and I call you on the telephone. When you pick up the phone, you don't pay. I'm paying for the call. But hang on a second, my telephone company doesn't operate in Thailand. The Thai telephone company is terminating that call. So the way this works is my telephone company gets all the money from me for this call. And then they pay a small amount, a small amount to your telephone company, and then you answer the call. So we're doing what's called financial settlement. And so the originating party pays the terminating party in real money. At the end of the month, we figure out who owns who. Why did it cost so much to call America? And why did the Americans pay so little to call you? Because it's true. Because when Americans called you, AT&T paid your telephone company. When your phone company called America, you paid. So if you make the prices really high locally, the Americans call you and you're a winner. In 1995, 95% of the Laotian GDP, 95% of the value of Laos was funded by AT&T in call accounting settlement. At one stage, AT&T was paying $3.6 billion a year in cash to all the phone companies around the world. AT&T didn't want that for the internet. They actually stopped it happening. So this model, although it's great, was never applied in the internet. But there are a number of technical reasons as well as political reasons for this. A telephone call is easy. It has a start, ring, ring, ring. It has a duration, and then it stops. What's that on the internet? There's no phones. There's no dial. What's the unit of a transaction? Because I can't think of one, right? There's no sort of transaction that has value. And so if you can't identify what's going on, how do you settle? How do I figure out if I owe you money or you owe me if we're not making transactions? It's just packets. And packets don't have that kind of value. So there's no call, there's no caller, there's no recipient. And interestingly, I can sit on my computer and I can make you send me packets. I can make you send me more packets than I send you. I can make you send me bigger packets than I send you. Or I can do it the other way from my end. So whatever deal we will like to work out, I can make you pay me. Or you could make me pay you. I'm like, it's really manipulatable, right? So we don't do it that way. When you have customers, what are they paying you for? For packets in and out. That's what they're paying for. So they're not only paying for the outgoing ones, and they're not paying by distance, they're paying for a service rather than packets. So we can't do it as packets. It just won't work that way. We can't financially settle counting packets or bytes. So if anyone tells you they can do IP packet accounting, they are lying. It doesn't work. Lots of people would like it to work. It doesn't work. Each packet is worthless. It's so worthless you can drop it and nobody cares. That's what happens in mobile all the time, right? Packets get dropped all over the place. Why did I send you a packet? I don't know. My machine thought it was a good idea, I think. They have no value or transaction context. So you can't set up inter-provider packet accounting at all. Because what will actually happen if you tried is the folk who are really bad will get the money. And it just simply creates the opposite of what you want. You don't want to encourage inefficient folk, you want to discourage it. You want to encourage efficiencies. So the internet is access, not usage. You pay the same amount whether you use the network or not. I know I do. So here I am, not in Australia, still paying my ISP the same amount every month because I'm paying for access, not use. Even my mobile phone has a fixed amount of data. I pay for that whether I use it or not. I'm paying for access. And that's what happens all around the world. So there's no such thing as a transaction at retail. If there's no transaction at retail, when you and I interconnect, how do we balance the money? Because I'm being paid by my customers, you're being paid by your customers. Now we're trying to figure out who owns who. This gets tricky. This gets very tricky. So you have the really simple case that if two service providers are about the same size, about. You're in Bangkok, I'm in Bangkok, we're both local ISPs, we're about the same size. It's really hard for me to pay you or for you to pay me because, quite frankly, I'm being paid by my customers, you're being paid by yours, up comes an exchange, life is easy. Yep, because no one's a loser, no one's a winner. It's just easier this way. So two-party peering is really simple when you're both the same size. What if, who's big these days? There aren't that many left. Who's big, really big? Oh no, NTT. What if NTT appeared at your local exchange and said, I will offer you routes to all of my customers all over the world if you give me routes to Bangkok? You're all laughing. It's never going to happen, is it?
what they're offering is free transit. And they're not stupid. They're never going to offer free transit. So what's the difference? Well, the difference is that NTT is huge and you're not. And you're not bringing equal value. NTT has got this massive global network and all these customers, and you're in Bangkok. That's not equal. And what will happen, and we know it's going to happen, is the smaller pays the bigger. And that's just life. So at some point, instead of peering, you're tiering, different tiers, different levels in the ecosystem, because the smaller always pays the larger. Even when we have multiple providers, you might see this going on. So a local network might buy a service from a regional network who peers with another regional network. And so you get this sort of model where there's always one peering relationship. This leads to a really interesting property of any path on the internet between any two endpoints. There's only ever going to be at most, whoops, I'll get the use of this pointer soon. There's only ever going to be one peering point, never two. If you look down a path, every path has exactly the same property. I go up, I peer, I go down. If you ever go up again, what's that called? A route leak. Because customers should never advertise transit routes to other customers, to other transits, sorry. Bad idea. So every route on the internet is a mountain. No valleys. Every route goes up through transit providers, across at most one peering point, and back down through transit relationships. And that's the way the internet works. So every ISP, no matter where you are, you may or may not have some peers. Yeah? You probably have some people who provide you with transit. And, you know, unless you like operating without money, you probably have people who pay you money, and we call them customers. Otherwise, you're not in business. So from an ISP's perspective, there's only three kinds of relationships. People you buy from, people who pay you money, we love them, and people that you can't quite figure out who should pay who. You can't quite work it out, so we call them peers. Customers pay you, you pay transits, and peers don't pay each other. The routing is equally simple. If I learn a route from a transit, I can reach somewhere, who do you tell that to? Now, I'm paying to send traffic up there, so the only people who can access that route are my customers, because I'm paying. If I ever send those routes to my peers, I'm going to get traffic that I'm going to pay for that I'm not getting paid for from my peer. So routes learned from customers, I'll tell everywhere. Routes learned from peers, I only advertise to customers. And routes learned from upstreams are only advertised to customers. If you're not following those rules, you're going broke. Right? The whole idea is customers give you money, no one else. So you spend money on transits, don't expose those routes to anyone else. So every relationship is either a peer or a customer or a provider. So you and I are trying to sort it out. I don't know how big you are. You don't know how big I am. What should we do? This is this art of peering. There's no rules. No rules. So the classic rule I used to do in Telstra, oops, was to say, that's it, you're a customer, and walk away. If you let me walk away and you say, hang on, come back, you're a customer. If you need this relationship more than I do, you're a customer. It's as simple as that. If you walk out of the room first and I say, whoops, hang on, I'm your customer. Because if I can't let this go, I'm the customer. It's only when both of us walk out the door at the same time that we go, well, okay, let's just peer, because it doesn't matter to either of us. So peering happens when neither of you need it more than the other, because need is money. Need is money. So the whole thing about peering is, if you're okay about this, peer, because neither of you need it. But if you think the other person is using you, if you think you're bigger, you shouldn't be peering. Why? Well, I'll take Telstra as a case in point. We spent a few $100 million or maybe more on building a national network. And someone who'd built a city network in Sydney says, we want to peer. How much have you spent? Well, a few $100,000. I've spent millions. You've spent a whole lot less. Why do you think we're equal? Why should you have access to my national network for no cost to you, and all I get is a few more customers in Sydney? Meh. And so this idea of parity as market pressure comes up. You only peer with folk that you think are your equals. Don't peer with anyone else. Simple as that. So if you can walk away from it, if the other party says, whoop, hang on, they're a customer. And then all you're arguing about is price. You know, it's just a price argument, not a role argument. So this idea that I peer with everybody is only viable if you Google. And even then, they don't peer with everybody. But universal peering, I peer with everyone, only happens when you've got nothing to lose. Telstra did peer openly in the United States. We didn't have a retail presence. We had nothing to lose. Everyone was bigger than us in the United States because we had no presence. So of course we would peer with anyone in the United States. Wasn't our market, we could only win. Because if we didn't peer with you, we'd have to pay somebody transit. So every peering relationship where we weren't was a win. But inside Australia, no one was our size. Didn't peer with anyone. Why? Leverage. The whole thing is an argument about leverage. If you get access to my network without paying, you're winning, I'm not. And that was the whole basis behind being very selective. And why should I make my network bigger? Why should I invest more when other folk are selling my network without paying me? Their customers are paying them. I don't get any of that money. Why should I build out my network further? So the real thing is, both of you have to get equal benefit. So the regulator steps in. Oh, you must peer. Government says you must peer. Then, in essence, what's going on is that you start to create commercial advantage and disadvantage. You start to create inequality and inequity, and the larger players have an active disincentive to invest further. It tilts the market and actually operates against the customer. So it's a pretty bad idea to try and regulate. So, we've decided I'm bigger than you. Sorry. We've decided, and you're paying me money. What do you want? Well, obviously to pay me less money, i.e. none. You want to be my peer. How do you become my peer? You buy him, and him, and him, and her. You're getting pretty awesomely big at this point. I've got a problem. Because when you say let's peer, and you're that big, I'm not sure I can say no. So what actually happens is, because every customer wants to be a peer, and in fact you, if you're that big, probably want to be my provider. Every peer wants to be a provider. Everyone wants more money. And so what actually happens is, exactly the same way in that example, that you went and bought a few of your friends, the ISP started to aggregate. Bigger is better. Bigger is always better in this industry. There is no such thing as a small, efficient ISP. Doesn't work. No such thing as a small airline company either. Doesn't work. So, because the internet doesn't really distinguish much on quality, it's all about cost. It's all about who's got the cheapest product out there. Because consumers actually don't know and care, really. So, this competitive industry tends to sort of equilibrate at the point where the costs are low. I can be 10 times more expensive than you. I can be 10 times better. No one's going to buy my service. They just won't. Consumers, I'm like, I've just got a really cheap SIM here. I'm like everyone else, as cheap as it comes. So, quite frankly, because of that, there's no objective rules when you're starting to deal in inter-provider relationships as who's the customer and who's the provider. So, basically within a locality, if you're in Bangkok and I'm in Bangkok, we have this little discussion. But as long as we're both bounded, we'll probably peer because neither of us can leverage the other. But if you're national and I'm city-based, I lose. If you're international, even if I'm country-based, I lose. So, in general, localities tend to peer. But once you get beyond that, it's bluff. It's pure bluff. Cogent. Cogent used to be big. It's now not so big. This is in America. People started de-peering with Cogent. Cogent started to complain. And the answer basically from the other ISPs is, you're no longer big. Pay or I don't care. Cogent went, well. And if you're a customer of Cogent, you don't see as much of the internet as everyone else. Tough. Because Cogent refused to pay. It's a game of bluff. And then entered content. Content was something the carriers never, ever managed to do well. Are you meant to peer with Google? Is Google a customer? Or are you meant to pay Google? What's your relationship as an ISP with I don't know, Amazon or eBay? Do you pay them money? I'm like, if I've got a shopping centre, there's one just next door, a number of folk aren't paying rent. They attract people into the shopping centre. All the other shopping centre tenants win, so they get free rent. Google is one of those kinds of tenants. They're a headline. So in your exchange even, does Google pay rent? Because if Google's there, lots of other people want to be there too. Yeah? So the question kind of is, when you talk about content, who pays whom? Should content get a free ride? Should they be paying like everyone else? So, what are we trying to do? Interconnect lots and lots of networks efficiently, but at the same time avoiding leverage. Avoid giving other folk a free ride. And we want to scale it up. So, once we've kind of figured out who pays who, the next thing is to understand, how do we interconnect? How do we actually push all these wires? So let's talk a little bit about exchanges. Now, hopefully you all know about this, right? Easy, yeah? Why do you build exchanges? Because anything else will make your head explode. Because it's an n-squared problem, isn't it? If you have 10 providers in this city, that's 100 cross-connects for each provider. That starts to get a lot of routing space, a lot of real estate, a lot of mucking about. That never scales. So this idea that I don't need exchanges is kind of silly. You do need something. So the first things we did, and I'm going back, and don't forget this slide pack is 20 years old. It's not talking about today. 20 years ago, the KIX was still fresh in our mind. The Commercial Internet Exchange, which was a router. Single router. Everyone connected to that router, n-squared became n. Yep. The problem was that that router had routing policies. And if two people were advertising reachability to the same endpoint, this router made a choice between those two people. Now, you, as another point on the exchange, whoops, I wish this bloody laser would work. You might not agree with the decision made here. You might prefer to go through someone else. In this model, you can't. If you have a router, there's one routing policy, unilaterally imposed. Typically, that's a really, really bad idea. And exchanges that offer this aren't very attractive because it's my routing policies that matter, no one else's. So we started to get to layer 2 exchange switches. So this is a very typical model. Bring your router to me. Links, PACs, DE kicks, AM6, you name it, all have much the same model. Loads and loads and loads of rack space. You bring a router in. It's basically one gigantic switching fabric, knock yourself out. Now, this is a 20-year-old slide, and we used to think one LAN would do it. It doesn't work like that anymore. Exchanges have tons and tons of fiber, but it's the same kind of model. Bring your equipment to us and have all these other possibilities of doing bilateral interchange. So whether you run a single layer 2 switch, won't scale, don't do that anymore, bad idea, or whether you run lots of fiber makes no difference. The reason why we do it this way is because of route diversity. That 2 different players can use 2 different paths to the same endpoint depending on their policy, and the exchange is not an active element in the policy selection process. The exchange doesn't colour my policies. I still operate my business exactly the same way as I always did. And then we got clever. I think this idea has largely died. The distributed exchange, where instead of bringing your routers into the unit, you sort of extrude the sort of intermediate LAN out to everyone's location. Think MPLS, or if you really want to be sort of up with the times, think SDN. Classic application, or maybe not. But this idea that instead of crowding the exchange with equipment, you sort of feed the lines out and you allow virtual circuits to connect to everyone else. Didn't take off, and I can see why. But if your exchange merely has other ISPs, it's never going to work. Everyone started adding value. They started trying to do content hosting, caching, all kinds of things. Generally died. That model didn't work. It hasn't lasted. What's the only thing that brings ISPs to an exchange? Okay, it's called Google, it's called Amazon, it's called Microsoft. If they're in the exchange, folk want to come to you. If they're not in the exchange, you might as well pick another business, because no one's going to come to you because you're no longer of any value. So 20 years ago we were saying there was a natural tendency to get big or get out, natural tendency to aggregate our businesses, because quite frankly little businesses don't work, not in this business. Now this has problems because we're recreating monopolies. So all of those issues about reducing competitive pressure, all of those issues around forcing markets through sheer market power, collective action, and the real risk that the politicians would see that if you start all acting together, prices go up but service doesn't. All of that's there because that's what happens. But on the other hand, if you're small, it doesn't work. You're just inefficient. So 20 years ago I was saying, and I'd still say it now, aggregation is just underway. Little becomes big because the only way folk survive is by buying other folk. The regulator, if they're trying to stop that and insist that there's a need to be lots and lots of small businesses, is never going to do this. Now you go, oh, that's obvious, isn't it? Except in Australia, where the government is building a common substrate network at the layer 2 level to encourage a whole suite of retail ISPs, most of them small and undercapitalised. The result is going to be inevitable. There'll be 2 left. Why did they do this? I have no idea. Did it make sense? No. Why? Because this industry naturally aggregates, and no matter what you do, you can't stop it, because the bigger I am, the cheaper it gets. And the cheaper it gets, the cheaper I can offer it to consumers. If you're not the same size as me, you're out of business. So that was 20 years ago. Nothing I said then has changed. That's the same message as now, hasn't it? So what has changed? Thank God modems have died. Yeah, right, modems have died. This is good news, right? I hated them too. Oddly enough, DSL was around then, DSL is around now. It hasn't died. Oops. Now we've got cable TV. There's cable. I don't know if you have it here. You probably do. And I don't know how much you're doing fibre to the premises, but I'm sure you are, because you are, right? Everyone is. But the only thing that really changed was mobiles. That 20-year period saw the rise of the iPhone and the smartphone. And now more than half of the internet is in everyone's pocket. And all of the money, the fixed line access system is the slum of the internet. It generates no money and no one cares anymore. All the money's in mobiles. That's why fibre is not being rolled out. Why bother? It doesn't make money the same way putting up towers makes money. Mobile makes money. So, okay, that changed. Not much else changed. Interestingly, in every country, there are 3 mobile licenses. Sometimes, if it's a really big country, you'll find 4. Never find 5. And never 1. The ISP industry is much the same. No matter where I look, you'll find 3 big ISPs and a bunch of others, but they're not important. Because that's the way competition works. Just enough to be competitive, but not much more. Because if I can't be one of the big ones, I'm out of the picture. So the competition still exists, but it's in a very reduced form. I love this slide. It's really detailed. But this is the map of the US between, what's that first date? 1964? Sometime around then. And he's sort of forecasting forward to 2047. This is a guy, Henning Schulzerine. He's an academic. He spent a couple of years at the FCC in America as their CTO. Divestiture. AT&T is too big. You're a monopoly. Go away. Judge Green oversaw the divestiture. It sparked SNet, Pac Bell, I think it was called, Ameritech, Bell South. Some of these names are familiar. They were what we call the regional bell operating companies. Each of them were given an exclusive license across 2 or 3 states. What did they do over the ensuing years? Well, they started to buy each other. You know, Verizon was formed out of Bell Atlantic, MCI, GTE, Vodafone, AirTouch and Prime. You know, all of these things were finding they were too small to compete. There were too many, it didn't work. And what we're finding now is we're about here. AT&T is now once more massive. Verizon's massive. It's not called Level 3 anymore. They merged with Quest to become CenturyLink. Not sure if they're massive or not, but that's all that's left. 1, 2, 3. How long will it become 1? Henning reckons it'll be 30 years. I don't. I think it'll be under 5. So this happens in every country. Every country has gone through the same process where deregulation reaggregated because the market couldn't work with lots and lots of little businesses. So what else happened? Fibre was amazing. Fibre is amazing. We can do 100 gig for the same price as 100 meg 20 years ago. 1,000 times faster for the same price, or if you look at it per bit, it's 1,000 times cheaper. No other industry. It's like buying a car for $1. Yeah? A car for $1. That's what we've done in 20 years in this industry. It is truly amazing. So the unit prices have simply plummeted. And quite frankly, it's going to come down further. We haven't finished yet. So carriage prices plunged. If you're in the carriage business, you either got to do a lot more data or a lot less money. or maybe both. More for less. It's getting hard. Peering is exactly the same. Nothing's changed. So if one of you relies on the other, you're no longer a peer, you're a customer. Peering only works when both of you don't need it. And that's really when it's at its most stable. When neither of you need it, sure, you'll peer. It doesn't matter at that point. So this is all just a game of bluff. Regulation doesn't help here. And in fact, next lesson, tell your regulator, stay away. With the best will in the world, intervention creates more harm than good. The regulator in Australia intervened because Telstra wouldn't peer. Yes, I'm sorry, I didn't peer. So they put out an order to say it's a $10 million fine and $1 million a day until you peer with 3 other players. Well, the management at Telstra, it was a big company, but it wasn't that rich. So they caved. And so we peered with 3 folk who were smaller than us. What happened after that? There were now 4 people in Australia who wouldn't peer with anyone else. And because there were 4, this was really quite a stable relationship. Everyone else hadn't a hope. Because with 4, everyone just blamed the other one. So Telstra said, oh, if you can peer with Optus or one of these others, we'll peer with you. But just you try. Because when they went to the competitors, they said, well, if you can peer with Telstra. And so 4 were able to make this entire thing a joke. Now, it wasn't that the regulator had forecast that, but regulatory intervention tilted the market to make the incumbents more stable, oddly enough. The other thing about regulatory intervention is if you get it wrong, the money gets scared. And so normal market pressures get distorted by regulatory tilt. I'm not going to invest in your country if I think my money is in high risk. I'm just not. And that's the same for every single country out there. This is why generally regulators are extremely careful about interfering in a private sector market. Because if you scare the money away, what are you going to do? Once the money leaves, everyone's got trouble. So, powerful incentives, oddly enough, exist to corrupt the regulatory structure as a result of this, and you only need to look no further than the 2G scandals in India to find what happens when it really goes the other way, when the regulator starts to intervene and behave badly. So in some ways, having a regulator that is, oh God, the American form of regulation, generally relaxed, very little intervention, seems to work best. Competition is not necessarily in the consumer's benefit, which may sound strange. But quite frankly, if I can build a car for $1 million, but I can build 10,000 cars for $1,000, bigger gives me access to prices that small never does. And the communications industry is exactly like that. Big is astonishingly efficient. Big works. So encouraging small providers simply for the sake of competition just raises prices to consumers. It doesn't make you any more efficient as an economy. It just doesn't work. So artificially keeping folk in the market who shouldn't be there, consumers are going to pay for that inefficiency. It doesn't work as a national strategy. Quite frankly, the market determines this much more efficiently than you. Last and not least, I don't think you've got long to live. I don't think you've got long to live. This market's failing. The transition and carriage market for ISPs is dying as we speak. Why? Huge changes in the economics of fibre and silicon. So some folk can enter this market at a much lower price than we thought. And the folk I am talking about are indeed the content distribution networks run by Google, run by Akamai, run by Cloudflare, run by Microsoft, run by Apple, surprisingly enough, and not many others. What's the richest company in the world today? Amazon. What's the second richest company in the world today? Google. What's the third richest company in the world today? Am I making the point yet? It's Facebook. We keep on going. Oddly enough, 7 out of the top 10, and I include Alibaba and Tencent, 7 out of the top 10 are service companies dealing with, if you will, internet service, but none of them are carriage. Verizon isn't there. AT&T isn't there. NTT isn't there. None of the old telcos are part of that top 10. Not anymore. So the transit market is failing. And in its place is content networks. Now, I'm going to go back 20 years again. Zoop. And what I said then was that national ISP carriage markets are going to fail. The money isn't in moving IP. The long-term money isn't. Regulatory intervention is stunningly dangerous. Yeah, okay. Intense aggregation is coming, but it doesn't matter. Because the money is not in plumbing. The money is not in moving packets. The money's in eyeballs. The money always was in content. What about the Internet of Things? It doesn't matter. 70% of the world's network is basically streaming television. Why? Eyeballs. Because eyeballs are money. Nothing else is money. Nothing else is money. So that has a huge change in the internet as the eyeball content distribution networks take over this network. Literally take it over. The inter-ISP traffic exchange, I'm sorry, it just doesn't matter anymore. All that the exchange offers is a convenient way for Google to get to all of the local providers in one hit. And maybe that's good enough. Maybe that's enough, but that's exactly what it is. You are an aggregation point for content distribution. So you're incredibly attracted to get CDNs into your facilities, and ISPs are sort of attracted to get there. The winner is the CDN. The winner always will be the CDN. So the IXP is a little more than CDN access points. Now, if you think there's a future in that, I have one thing to offer you. It's the 2 rack unit Netflix cache. It's only 2 rack units. It's a fully blown cache, and I put it inside the ISP's own network. I don't need an exchange point. I don't need a content distribution network. I don't need all the rest of the local infrastructure as long as I can touch that distribution unit. We're running really expensive racks in these exchanges, and you think the content distribution folk need it. They don't. As the stuff gets smaller and faster, we don't need dedicated racks to hold it, dedicated power, dedicated anything. If I can drop it right beside the user loves me. Faster content, you know, they're happy as it comes. The ISPs love it because all of a sudden they don't even need to pay exchange fees. The stuff is right at their door. And so little by little we're breaking down the model of the internet into points of isolated distribution. There's no need for a very big network anymore. Markets always avoid intermediaries, people in the middle. And unfortunately, exchanges are people in the middle. And it might look good today, and it does, but don't think it's going to last, because it won't. Whoops, this is not a happy talk, is it? Content moves closer to the user because the user wants content close to them. They're sick and tired of delays. They want to watch Netflix, and they want to watch it in HD TV, and they want to watch it now, not next week. It's obvious, and that's what's going to happen, because that's what they're going to pay for. They're not paying for the internet anymore, they're paying for television. What does that happen? A longer role for IXPs and ISPs? I don't know. I don't know. It's a hard question. Some final words. I've got 2 slides. This is me. This is my life. This is the life I lived. I spent 10 years building the Australian Academic and Research Network between roughly the mid-80s and the mid-90s. I spent 10 years running Telstra's internet, and yes, I was not a nice person. I didn't peer with anyone. That wasn't my job. They paid me to the biggest in the country. I was. That was my job. For the last, oh God, it's been about 10 years now I've been working for APNIC, and we're very nice people. We don't pick favourites. We just give addresses to everyone. we're not a player anymore, we are an observer. So whatever this industry does, as long as it keeps on needing addresses, we're okay. If they can figure out a way to do it without addresses, okay, we've got trouble too. So your situation might be different. Things are different in your country than mine, obviously. Who's got the money, the investment profiles, the role of government, it's all different. So what I've said might be directly relevant to you, it might be a little bit skewed. That's okay. It's a different environment with a subtly different history. So that's just based on, that's Latin for listener beware. It's my story, it's not necessarily your story. So, you know, look at it that way. But you should read all of these things. Because if you think you're going to be in business next week, you really need to understand what these folk have been saying. You really do. Because it's important messages. The internet's being quietly rewired. How streaming video has changed the shape of the internet. A paper by a well-known guy, Craig Labovitz, he was working in the Merit team when they set up the NSFnet in 1988. He knows this stuff really well. 7 years ago, he wrote a paper on interdomain traffic, the rise of the CDN and the death of the ISP. Read it. And this last one, an IEEE paper, saying, well, it's sort of advocating CDNs as if it needs champions. It doesn't need champions. It's just coming no matter what. But an interesting paper nevertheless. So I'll leave that up. That was the last slide. Yeah, it was. If you're interested, have a read of those, because I know it's in English and all that, and it's a little hard, but like I said, if you work in this business, you need to know that. If you read nothing else, you need to know that. Thank you. Work for Google. And I'm actually serious in some ways, that you've got to do what people pay you to do, because this isn't the age of telephony anymore. You can't regulate what people want. That's over. People are spending their own money, and our job is to supply what they want. So in some ways the CDN is natural. It's just reacting to need. And so this whole rise of mobility, the rise of CDNs, of course. So yes, it's not a trite answer to work for Google or Akamai or Cloudflare. They need good people. They really need help. And quite frankly, a lot of you have the experience that they will use. Because it's not that the skills are dead, it's still routing, it's still IP. But maybe it's the content folk that need you as much as you need them. Yeah. Like I said, smaller, faster, right beside the access network. And then we're going to have the most fascinating fight I think we've ever witnessed. Elon Musk reckons that he can launch 7,000 spacecraft the size of a shoebox. Those 7,000 spacecraft will be in polar orbit. They will orbit at exactly 160 kilometers above you. That's 12 milliseconds. They will be equipped with Ka beam, which is really fast, tens if not hundreds of gigabits, as long as it doesn't rain. But if it rains only in small storms, hopefully it's not raining over here or not raining over there, because there's going to be 10 of them in the sky for everybody. So at some point, if the local radio access folk don't get it together, Elon Musk is going to do a deal with the content distribution and serve it from just above the legal zone of outer space. Because at 160 kilometers there are no laws. The laws stop at 150. And the atmosphere stops at about 100. So you can stay at that altitude for many years, beaming down at Ka speed, which is fast, from 7,000 spacecraft. Elon Musk reckons he can launch them as side ballast on commercial loads. He's not going to pay to launch them. This stuff is going to be astonishingly cheap if it takes off. So this is the next round of fight. we've kind of lost long distance, we're losing distribution, and now the fight is in local access. Who gets direct to the user? I think it's really exciting. You know, I love space stuff, you know, don't you? It's really cool. So yes, I think that's the next fight. Waste of time. Waste of time. It's not fast enough, and it's not predictable enough. 7,000 orbiting spacecraft does the job. You know, really does the job. Loon was just a, oh yeah. Who's investing in SpaceX? Apple, Google, Amazon. It's, for them, not a lot of money, but it is really important. If they want to take on the last mile mobile access providers, the best place to do it is from above. And so that's the next big fight.
So I have to change my mobile phone again
No.
to connect to the Elon Musk.
It's only 160 kilometers away. There's no mountains. There's no obstacles. It's a clear shot. The Iridium handsets were so big because that was 36,000 kilometers. That thing can go 160 kilometers straight up without any change, which is brilliant. Just don't be inside a building. Local collection points, Wi-Fi sideways. It's the more obvious answer. No other questions? You're all going to join a SpaceX company? Cool. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have to prepare for the new job. Switch board.
That's all it is. Just
You are going to be there after space.
Doing the same thing, but
Doing the same thing.
different boss.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Very nice presentation. I like that.
ก็สำหรับงานเราก็จบใช่ไหม
Scary.
Scary, but that's what life's about.
เนี่ยอ๋อใช่เนาะเรามีคนสำคัญเรามีแชร์ของไทยน็อกอยู่มาด้วยนี่ จะปิดซะหน่อยไหมครับ ก็กี่โมงกันนี่ก็สามทุ่มแล้วเนาะจะ3 ทุ่มไปแล้วผมว่าก็ได้เวลาอันควรแยกย้ายแล้วครับก็ขอบคุณทุกท่านนะครับที่มาร่วมกิจกรรมของไทยน็อกในครั้งนี้นะครับก็หวังว่าจะได้ความรู้ได้ไอเดียใหม่ๆกลับไปในเพื่อเป็นประโยชน์กับทุกท่านนะครับ